Okay, today is session 4 of our food system and its impact. And we will discuss the costs and ethics to highlight that changing our food system is possible and already happening. Mr. David Dornbos, has been a faculty member of the Calvin Biology Department, teaching courses and mentoring graduate students since 2024, 2004, excuse me. He has also worked in crop genetics and agronomy in the agricultural industry in roles such as the global head of seed production, field agronomist. He is a member of the Iowa State University graduate faculty, where he earned a PhD in crop production. He also holds an MS degree from Ohio State University, and finally a BS in biology from Calvin University, where he's now employed as a professor. He has also authored a book called Your Stake, S-T-E-A-K, Your Stake in the World, on which this course is themed. So with that, I'll turn the microphone and the camera over to Professor David Dornbos. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Just by way of quick reminder, we talked week 1 about how the food we consume impacts our health, and connected more specifically, the standard American diet with chronic disease and the cost of that chronic disease. And in week 2, we focused a bit more on our current food production system, how it became to be as it is. And then last week, we talked a little bit more about the current food production system, leading to an introduction of the idea of agroecology or agroecological food production systems as a way of thinking about how we might produce food in a more environmentally sensitive way and food consistent with the diet that we might consume as a DASH diet or a DASH dietary pattern. So emphasizing fruits, veggies, whole grains, maybe some level of meat. And this week, the idea is to kind of start to wrap those things together so you can hopefully see the progression. The question would be is if we do want to pursue a more agroecological system, thinking about what that looks like, how might consideration of ethics and what I'm calling our true costs or consideration of externalized costs help to motivate a change in that direction? So that's kind of where we want to go. So agroecological systems, why might we promote them? This is where you have to play back.
Both are very important.
Okay. Yep. I'll say it, I'll repeat it back. So the health of the planet, environmental health. Okay. Those are reasons why we might promote agroecological systems. Other reasons. Yes, ma'am. Our own health. Okay. Yep. Say it again. The current system might not be sustainable. So that was an emphasis. So biodiversity is one of the reasons why our current system might not be sustainable. We have huge tracts of land in places like the United States and around the world where we've got monocultures, inherently low biodiversity. Why is biodiversity important? Because a lot of times, we think about biodiversity and we say, yeah, it's important, but why particularly? I mean, beyond Genesis 1, God created it good and probably is a little bit perturbed when we, by our careless behaviors, cause species to become extinct. Yes, sir. So better pest resistance. What do you mean by that?
If you've got multiple monoculture, then your whole crop can get destroyed by one pest going amok.
So that's definitely true. We have what are called the European corn borer. This is an insect, a worm, a larva that lives its entire life cycle on corn. It needs corn. It only really becomes an economically important pest when you have large tracts of just corn. There is the corn rootworm. There's the soybean aphid. So, I mean, you can just think about some of these insect pest names. They're actually named after the crop that they attack. If there are not large areas of that same kind of plant, there's never the possibility for them to become economically important. Hence, no inherent need for an insecticide then. What are some reasons why we might not promote an agroecological system? Because we enjoy the status quo. Yeah, we benefit in some cases. Some of us benefit a lot by the status quo, some more than others. Yes, sir.
Protein is more important in older people.
Yes. So, and maybe even younger people that are especially more athletically active, right? So protein is an important part of the diet, and we need to be able to get enough protein in our diets.
We'll probably have to pay.
Yeah, you probably will have to pay more. Why? Where would the cost come from? So I'm kind of testing you a little bit because we've covered some of this stuff, right? So it's definitely more labor. I'm sorry. It's definitely more labor intensive, and labor is expensive. And so if you've got more labor involved, that's where that's going to be a key driver of a lot of those costs.
Well, I'm thinking, with the industrialization and corporations, they are certainly not going to promote it. And the American diet, it's, people don't want to change. And we have to make sure it's equitable for both rich and poor.
Right. And then right back there.
Well, I think equitable for rich and poor. I think our poor people struggle to have access to that healthy diet.
Yeah. These healthier diets, I mean, you've all been to grocery stores. If you buy fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, you're going to pay more for the calories that you get and the nutrients that you get than if you eat canned, typically. Certainly standard American diet types of foods. Remind me, why is that the case? Because remember, we talked a little bit about, I can't remember if it was last time or the time before, why is it that processed foods, ultra processed foods like Twinkies are more expensive than carrots, when to produce a carrot, all you have to do is plant carrot seeds and you pull carrots out of the ground, wash them off, you can eat them, as opposed to Twinkies, which are a variety. There's like 32 or 34 ingredients in a Twinkie that come from corn and soybeans. That's where they're derived from, and then they're reconstituted into the delectable little cake.
Because we want what we want, and we don't want to pay much for what we want. And our wants are created by a great commercial system of creating desire through advertising, which alters our diet toward the direction they want.
Who here has eaten a Twinkie?
I've had a deep fried Twinkie. They're
Okay.
delicious.
So pretty much everybody knows what we're talking about. So Twinkies taste good. They're sweet.
Twinkies also have a longer shelf life than carrots.
Yes, they do. So I took a Twinkie out of its cellophane wrapper and put it on my filing cabinet top in the office, and it sat there for 15 years and never rotted. It got a little smaller because dehydrated, but it never rotted. I could have probably treated it with water and eaten it.
Also,
None.
it's also it's convenient. People go, it's boxed, they throw it in their microwave. When you do a vegetarian plant-based diet, you are chopping a lot of
Yeah, you are.
vegetables, and you have to be careful and think about what you're going to eat, what ingredients you need. It's not as convenient.
So let's call this market inertia. There's a lot of market inertia to maintain the standard American diet because, yes, the foods are tasty. They, or at least our palates are taught, have learned So this is an aesthetic that we've learned to appreciate and desire those kinds of tastes or levels of sweetness, saltiness. And it's convenient and it's less expensive. So I kind of started with that question on this little stream. Why are Twinkies less expensive? When you've got to plant corn seeds and soybean seeds, you've got to make the byproduct or the ingredients, and then you have to re-cook them as like a little Twinkie, as opposed to a carrot, where you're just going to take one kind of seed, plant it and harvest it and just wash it and eat it directly. Why are Twinkies less expensive than carrots?
Well, because they are done industrially.
They're
They are done industrially.
they're grown in
a huge amount.
but I can grow carrots industrially. I'm gonna-
They are more labor intensive.
They are more labor intensive, but I can grow a monoculture of carrots. So you're true to a degree. There's another factor that's sitting in there. We've talked about it. So we're still reviewing.
They put chemicals in Twinkies like fat, sugar, salt to keep us eating them.
Yeah. So but that should add cost, not reduce cost. Why are Twinkies less expensive? There are economies of scale. That's what same as Javier is kind of saying. Governmental influence. The Farm Bill. Remember the Farm Bill? $700 billion a year subsidizing which crops? Cotton, yep. Carrots? Not much. If you look in the Farm Bill, there is some level of support for what are called alternative crops, which are basically all fruits, all vegetables. They're termed simply in the Farm Bill as being alternative crops. So it's less than 0.1% of the Farm Bill budget is supporting those crops. So why do industrially, now thinking about factories not producing the corn and soybeans, why do they use corn and soybeans as raw ingredients in their industrialized process? They're cheaper. That's the only reason. So can you affect the Farm Bill? Can we as people affect the Farm Bill? So theoretically we can. So I don't necessarily want to take subsidies away from farmers, because farmers do count on them, and I count an awful lot of farmers as dear friends. None of them really like the process either, or at least certainly aspects of it, but they're in a system, right? So the system, if it were to subsidize other crops, think about the cost change that could happen. If we over time gradually transferred the subsidy from corn and soybean to fruits and vegetables, what is that going to look like in the grocery store when we look at prices of things? So there are reasons why to promote, why not to promote. The money is behind the current industrialized process. So there aren't really many industrial carrot growers out there that can really afford to do a marketing campaign to say, eat more carrots. Although the government, in its defense over the past decade or so, occasionally I see signs on like US 131 billboards that will say, parents, eat your fruits and veggies because kids will do what you do. So I have seen those, not very many. I see more eat milk with the mustache kinds of ads. What was your impression of the successful practitioners? You got the little Word file, I think, that Hannah sent out. Hopefully some of you watched some of these. If you think about these successful practitioners, just like these little web clips that I encourage you to look at, any impressions, general impressions? Altieri. Altieri is a professor at University of California.
He stated that it's more resilient, ecological, the small farming, it conserves the ecosystem, and it's more resilient in the face of climatic change.
Yes. So he is specifically in that clip focused on shade-grown coffee. Altieri has written a book entitled Agroecology, which I didn't think to bring along, but he has written a book on it as well. So he's thinking beyond shade grown coffee, although this particular clip, he focused on that. Other thoughts?
He also talked about how productive you could be on a single acre when it was polyculture as opposed to monoculture, which was surprising.
Yeah, so that kind of verified or maybe validated in a sense the point. Remember at the end of last time when we went through some bullets and talked a little bit about yield advantage of crops of different kinds grown in polyculture versus monocultures. So Altieri talked about that. How about the little Pasadena, California backyard? You picked that one up? So, oh my goodness, talk about profitability in this is a lot less than an acre. This is like 1/10 of an acre or actually smaller. And a family is actually making a living on it, which is crazy to think about. You kind of walk through their system and you start thinking about, oh, if you're innovative, this is what can be possible. That's crazy. Detroit, Michigan. You probably heard about Detroit, Michigan, maybe before the clip, but we dropped that in there. A concern of growing these kinds of agroecological systems in Chicago, in Cleveland, in Detroit. They're in every one of these major cities. A concern is, remember when you used to buy leaded gas and put it in and then we switched to unleaded? If you ask any college kids today what leaded gas is, they're going like, what are you talking about? It's all unleaded. They've never known leaded gas. But for decades, we burned leaded gas in our car. So guess what's in the soils in all of these urban areas along the expressways where they tend to put these gardens? Lead, a heavy metal, which isn't very good for your health, is it? Cognitively in kids, maybe especially. So they have to use raised beds. They actually have to bring in soil from other places to make it work. I mean, to produce food and actually not harm people. Generally, how did these clips make you feel? Wonderful, I heard.
My overall impression was that they're finally taking these things seriously. That's what I kind of gleaned from first thing that came to my mind when I read all these and watched these.
A lot of people are taking these processes seriously. Absolutely. And notice where. Everywhere, but often urban areas where we tend to be consuming more of these foods or need to consume more of these foods. So a lot of people are doing agroecological systems of different types in a lot of places.
All of this reminds me very much of Victory Gardens.
Yeah. If I ask my students at Calvin, does it remind you of Victory Gardens? They're going like, what's a Victory Garden? But yeah, World War II, I think you may be well aware of what a Victory Garden is. And so these are, Victory Gardens maybe on steroids a little bit, but that's what people are doing. And so that's where I hope that you gain some sense. I hope that you gain some sense of hope that people are doing it. It is possible, and they can validate you can produce a lot more healthy calories, nutritionally rich, calorically poor, which is what our bodies need, in relatively small areas. In the backyard in Pasadena, that is their livelihood. But a lot of these folks, it does not necessarily take a lot of time. It doesn't take nearly as much time. It's not as much work as is often what people think. So here's another little film. I think some of you have seen this already because you asked me if I knew about it. And yes, so this is not an assignment. I can't give you an assignment because I'm not going to see you again after today necessarily. But if you want a really good watch, The Biggest Little Farm is definitely worth spending an hour and 45 or so minutes with. I bought it. It was like $4.95 Amazon. If you've got an Amazon account, it might not cost you anything. It's going to show you a lot of the same sorts of things that are in the little vignettes, but it is a story of a couple who had no farming background, figuring out how to do this just north of LA, Los Angeles. And these were two people that lived in LA. The wife was a culinary kind of a cook, and the husband was a photographer for kind of wildlife kinds of things. And they decided to buy a little land and try to make a go of agroecologically producing food for a lot of the same reasons that you're interested in these things. And a couple of things that I really like about this film is they show some of the same ideas that are in the vignettes, but they also show you it is not as easy as it looks. I mean, I think a number of you vegetable garden, you realize some years it works well, some years it doesn't. It took you a lot of practice, a lot of years to get to where you are. So if you've got no experience of how to put a seed in the ground or what to do to make those things grow, this is not trivial, although it's also not rocket science either, is it? The other thing I like, and so they kind of play that out. They show when they start producing lots of fruits and vegetables, animals, insects, and the problems that they encounter along the way are serious. And they also show longer term, if you stick with it and you manage that system well, you can control those insects without ever using pesticides. They never use pesticides. I mean, in the way that you're thinking of pesticides, they do use birds, and they use dogs, and they use owls, and lots of other kind of things like that. Another part that I like about this little film is they are integrating animals with the fruit and the vegetable systems. And so I think animals need to, if you're going to have a healthful, sustainable, ecological system that's going to provide you the protein that your body needs, you have to have animals in the system. So I was talking with, is it Vicky, about buffalo in the high plains, kind of once again, and in some of the roles, some of the ecological benefits that buffalo provide. Well, they're ruminants, so they selectively feed grasses. They eat seeds and everything else. They poop those out, so they redistribute nutrients, they redistribute seeds, and with their hooves, they till. And so in Biggest Little Farm, they're showing you how they're using sheep and cows, which are ruminants, and they have a greenhouse gas footprint, I understand, to do some of the kind of ecological services that are needed for this farm to be sustainable in the longer term. They talk a little bit about efficient water use. There's a big, huge rainstorm, and their neighbors have tremendous erosion. They don't have any. It's productive. They're producing vegetables, fruit, some animal protein. A lot of eggs is a major form of the animal protein that they produce. They start with soil quality. When they buy this little farm, they realize the dirt is just that. It's dirt. It's not soil. It's like big, cloddy, rocky stuff. And they realize that healthful soil is critical to get the system started. And they show you what soil looks like at the beginning of the film and what in that same place soil looks like after they've regenerated it. And that's all about organic carbon. It's all about microbes in soil. And then biodiversity. They employ at some point an agroecological agronomist who passed away during the film, and that part's kind of sad. But he is fond of saying, what we need is, quote, biodiversity, unquote. And that if you get that biodiversity, farming in that sort of way is kind of like surfing. Here comes the wave. Instead of fighting the wave, you ride it. And it's kind of a cool metaphor. Limiting factors of place. This really comes out in the practitioners. When you see people farming in Amsterdam versus Pasadena versus Australia, what you can grow and how you grow it is always going to be different. So it needs to be place-based. That's part of the complicatedness of it, but that's also part of the fun of it, figuring out those systems. It's not how we used to farm. So it will not work if we want to go back to the 50s and the 60s. It has to be a different way of farming. Now, there will be some attributes of how we used to farm, but it can't be exactly how it was, I guess, in my opinion. So why not? So this is a guy that really hung me up for a while, and he's a good guy. He's passed away some years ago now. If I share the name Norman Borlaug, does that ring a bell? Yeah, this is the father of the green. He is attributed as being the father of the Green Revolution. He was a wheat breeder, worked out of CIMMYT, which is a UN-funded research institute in Mexico City. CIMMYT is still there. It is still funded by the UN. And he was at the American Society of Agronomy meetings that I participated in a number of years ago. And as a 93-year-old man, this is a quote that he gave us then. I now say that the world has the technology either available or well advanced in the research pipeline to feed on a sustainable basis a population of 10 billion people. While the affluent nations can certainly afford to adopt ultra low risk positions and pay more for food produced by the so-called organic methods, the 1 billion chronically undernourished people of the low income food deficit nations cannot. And so this is part of that thinking, I think, that is resident really throughout mainstream agriculture, think industrialized agriculture, that we feed the world. That's where this idea comes from. And for a long time, I was really kind of hung up on this. And there's some deeper history to it too. The deeper history goes back to Thomas Malthus, Sir Thomas Malthus. Anybody hear of that guy? He's an English guy because he was sirred. He became a knight. He was knighted. He had two postulata. And the first is that food is necessary for the existence of man. Anybody care to argue with that one? And the next one you'll enjoy. Secondly, that the passion between the sexes is necessary and will remain nearly in its present state. Anybody want to argue with that one? In other words, people are gonna reproduce. So he said, from these two postulata, there is a powerful prediction. Assuming my postulata are correct, those two, I say that the power of population is indefinitely greater than the power of the earth to produce subsistence for man. So this is the so-called Malthusian nightmare. So here it is, population when unchecked increases at an exponential ratio. Grow bacteria in the petri dish and you can see it happen. You can look at the human growth curve globally. It follows that same pattern. Subsistence, our ability to produce food, increases on an arithmetical ratio. In other words, it's linear. So what this means is that a slight acquaintance with the numbers will show the immensity of the first power, exponential, with respect to the second, arithmetic. So this is the Malthusian nightmare. Imagine this is human population growth, and that's our ability to produce food. And that was the reason why for decades, I was locked in a system of thinking we have to use an industrialized monoculture system because we are somewhere like around here, let's say. Well, how does this play out? Production capacity using industrialized monocultures is increasing. If you look across decades from the 60s to 2010, it's increasing steadily, pretty close to linear. You draw a line pretty much close to a straight line through those individual kind of decade or year points. If you kind of look at it, maybe it looks like it's a little steeper here than maybe the slope here. So maybe our rate of food production increase is slowing down, but it's pretty close to linear. So Malthus was right on that particular point. Food production is growing roughly arithmetically. If you look at food production capacity per person, however, now you take the first and the second postulated together, this is the amount of food available for each person on the planet at the year when the food was, during the year that food was produced. You realize from the 60s to 2010, we did see food production capacity growth through the 60s, 70s, 80s, even to the 90s. And since then, it is flat to slightly down. So this is the industrialized system, right? That is producing most of these calories. So if there's some sense that food production capacity is being outstripped by population growth, there's some broad evidence to suggest it's probably true. That being said, we currently produce plenty of food to feed the current global population of people. The question is, can we sustain this into the 2030s, 2040s, 2050s, when population growth from 8.3 billion today is going to be 10 to 11 billion by 2050? So that is kind of the question. At the same time, recognizing is it came out in a little bit of one of the questions of why to support an agroecological system. Someone here said that, aren't we harming our ability to produce food in the future? And the answer is yes. When we see soil erosion, when we, in particular, but when we see water use, water overuse, loss of water quality, this current system, while intensified and producing enough food today, is at the same time actively undermining the ability to produce the same amount of food in the future. The little ecological report card showed exactly that. The block was green, you produce enough food, but the trend line is down. So polycultures, which are extensified systems, talked about last time, consistently out-yield intensively managed monocultures by 50 to 60%. So if we produce enough food today, imagine we could produce well more than enough food for 10 or 11 billion people if we were to broadly adopt an extensified polycultural system. It seems really counterintuitive. And so I didn't trust those research numbers either. And I had to think a little bit about it. And I'll make my case. I'll go through some slides. I don't want to spend a lot of time on them. How can these intensified polycultural systems actually produce more food on an area basis? How do they do it? So the research shows that we do it. I showed you the bottom line results. The question is, does it actually make sense? And I think it does. I think it does. So what we have to consider, though, are efficiencies. And if I ask students, I asked you week one, is our current food production system efficient? Y'all agree that it is. It is very efficient. But I think we have to dig more deeply into what we mean by efficiency. And I think we need to kind of break it down. One efficiency, in the end, I think favors the industrialized monoculture food production system, and that's labor. We can produce a lot of calories with very little human labor because we're using big machines as surrogates. The industrialized monoculture system does that in spades. I mean, if you're playing spades, that is the ace of spades right there. That is the trump card. But that's not the only kind of efficiency. And it's the labor cost, right? It's the cost of the food. So you can kind of see maybe or think about why our system has evolved the way it has. Very few people produce a lot of calories, and labor is the most expensive cost sector to a farmer. They're going to do everything that they can under God's creation to get their labor costs down, because then food prices can come down. But again, that's not the only efficiency. We can talk about how efficiently our crops use light, how efficiently we're protecting, maintaining soil, given that soil quality is important to yields. Carbon, so carbon use efficiency, you can think about this as greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but also carbon in the soil as organic matter. So carbon, where is the carbon and what is the carbon doing for us? In the atmosphere, it's warming. In the soil, it's fertility. Nutrient use efficiency. So this is, I focused a little bit on nitrogen, kind of said, on average, farmers, for each pound of nitrogen that they apply to a crop, the crop gets about 20% of it. If you use sustainable ag really, really effectively, you can get that up to 40%. But that means somewhere between 60 and 80% of the nitrogen that we apply to corn goes elsewhere. It goes into different ecosystems where it causes problems. Water use efficiency and then biodiversity. We talked a little bit about biodiversity. We want to talk a little bit more. So this is my garden of 2 years ago, and that's the cornfield across the road, 84th Street, just south of Alto. And the question is light use efficiency. Polycultures capture more sunlight annually than industrialized monocultures. And that's simply because corn is a semi-tropical plant. It's a C4 grass. It's a warm season grass. You can plant seeds early, late April, really in May. If you plant them earlier, the little plants are gonna get frozen. And so farmers can't plant until later in the year. What time in the year or what month of the year do we have warm enough sun to grow green things? Well, July and August is peak, but how early can things start to grow? Early. But if I go out to when does your lawn grass green up? March. When you go into your forest or your local forest, when do you find the ephemeral spring flowers on the forest floor? March and April. There's plenty of solar radiation to grow some things. It's chilly, it's cool nights. Cool season plants, think lettuces, radishes. When do y'all plant those? I start planting mine in March. Sometimes I can get a few in the ground in late February without using a hoop house. And those little buggers, it can freeze at night and it doesn't kill the plant.
To go in, it was maybe like late August or so. I planted lettuce and it's like, and I harvested some, but then I thought, oh, this was stupid. Why did I plant so late? But the snow covered it, kept it perfectly, fine all winter. And in the spring, when the snow melted, there was lush green lettuce, and the tips of the leaves weren't even brown. It was all green.
So these are cool season plants. They're not semi-tropical like a C4 corn is, and they can tolerate those cold temperatures. They won't grow when it's below like 40 degrees Fahrenheit outside, even if there's bright sun, but usually above about 40 degrees, they'll grow slowly. And if you get warmer days, they'll grow fortunately faster. So in polycultures, you can grow crops, edible crops, for 6 months of a 12-month cycle in Michigan. But corn and soybean, really their key months of growth, there's 3 of them where they've literally canopied over rows. So it's just really now in kind of early to mid-ish July that cornfields are actually starting to have leaves cover over the rows. Imagine any solar radiation between the spring and now that hits that soil between the rows is lost yield potential. So I would go to farmer field days, which you used to run, I learned, and I would ask farmers, what do you harvest? These are corn and soybean farmers when I worked for Syngenta. We would do field days and we're trying to sell seed for the next year, what we're trying to do. Get farmers to fall in love with certain hybrids. And so I would ask them, what do you actually harvest? Oh, what do they harvest? Yeah, you would say corn, grain, soybean grain, because that's the obvious thing that they pull their combine through to the field to get. That's to collect, and that's what they get paid for. And going like, no, not really. That shouldn't be your primary concern. What do you actually harvest as a farmer? Sunlight. Who said that? Yeah, sunlight, water, nutrients, but especially sunlight. The faster you can canopy rows, the more solar radiation you get the leaves of your crop to capture, the more corn grain you're going to get. So plant your rows narrower, plant earlier, do whatever you need to do to be able to capture more sunlight with your crop plant leaves. If you don't capture more of that solar radiation with your crop plant leaves, if it hits the soil surface, what is that solar radiation actually going to produce? Weeds. So when you're vegetable gardening, you learn that you plant your rows relatively close together. If I've got carrots, which are kind of weak little plants, I'll plant the rows literally 6 inches apart, and I'll plant 3 of them in a row, 3 rows in a row, and then I'll have a bigger gap to put my knees between when I'm actually weeding them. Because the more I can use carrot leaves to cover the soil surface, the less weeding I'm going to have to do in those carrots a little later on when those carrot plants start getting big. Do the same thing with lettuces and radishes where you don't have big plants. If I have squashes or tomatoes, I plant them in more or less a 3-foot grid. So I put almost 2.5 feet between adjacent plants in a grid, because I'm thinking, what is the natural shape of a plant? Pretty much any plant. It's not to be a line of seeds in a row with big spaces on either side. If you look down on a maple tree growing in the meadow, it's round. Plants want to be round. So you plant in a grid whenever you can. And by doing some of those things, you're optimizing the light that you can capture, and you're using your crop plants as a primary herbicide. Okay, we're going to go faster on the next ones. We talked about nitrogen use, kind of made the point that forests, we don't have to fertilize them with nitrogen to make them grow. They are closed systems or close to closed systems. They do not leak much nitrogen. The leaves fall to the ground, those leaves decompose, and then as the decomposed leaves as organic matter continue to decompose, mineralize would be the name, it releases nitrogen from the previous year's growth. The plant tree roots are sitting there and they can suck those nutrients right back up. Have you ever, even in a really heavy rainfall, seen water run out of a healthy forest? All that rain gets soaked in. So if you don't have water running out of the forest, you are going to reduce the amount of nitrogen that is going to move with that water. Carbon use efficiency. So this is the future fertility. So a sustainable ag technique is, farmers will use contours and terraces to slow down soil erosion. They'll use no-till. They'll plant next year's crop directly into the dead stubble of the previous crop. But we can do the same thing in agroecological systems. So you compost, and then you let the material in that compost bin decompose down, and then you basically have pure organic matter that you can spread out over into your garden and move into the soil, where it will mineralize, and the nutrients that are in those plant materials will be eventually be made available to the plant. So that's organic matter put on the soil. Usually do that in the fall. Be careful doing too much of that in the spring, because if you put too much organic matter on the spring, what happens? You burn the plants, but there might actually be less nutrients available for the plants, because the fungi and the bacteria that are decomposing all that biomass, they're tying up all the nutrients. So you want microbes to decompose your biomass, but you don't want that to be happening while your crops are growing. So you want the bacteria to be dying and decomposing when your crop's growing, because as they die and decompose, the proteins from those dead little bodies are what actually is going to be making the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium available for your crop plants. Or use a cover crop. So this is the hairy vetch. So I plant hairy vetch. Usually I'll overseed it in August, and those little seeds will hang out underneath the squashes and whatever, and they'll start to germinate in September, and they grow green. They'll stay green underneath the snow all winter long. This is a nitrogen fixing legume. And it turns out if you do a light till in the spring, this stuff is easy to kill. And so then it decomposes, and it's a way of using nitrogen fixers during the winter months to put some nitrogen back in the soil so you don't have to use fertilizer. And this is my favorite one. How many of you put bird boxes by your gardens? Yeah, so most do. Does anybody hear of this guy, Dr. Talamy? Yeah, me too. At Meyer Gardens. In fact, I think he's coming back this summer or this fall. So if you have a chance to get to Meyer Gardens, look him up and get in there if you can. So this is data taken from Tulaney. I always like to have like house wrens and bluebirds, those kinds of things around, chipping sparrows. These are insectivorous little birds. They're eating bugs all the time. They're flying in and out of your garden. At least they are mine. So it turns out one little eastern bluebird pair, this little 1 ounce insect terror, will take 37 caterpillars to the nest. He had grad students count these. So imagine sitting by bluebird nest, 37 caterpillars to the nest every 30 minutes, 12 hours per day. That's 900 caterpillars per day to feed those little babies. Over 90 days with 2 broods, that's 80,000 caterpillars, 1 nest that was used twice. So that is your insecticide. So if you apply inorganic pesticides, what happens? That kills all the caterpillars, kills all your beneficial insects too. And you're not going to have any bluebirds. You're not going to have any house wrens or chipping sparrows because there's nothing in there for them to eat. So yeah, get them close, and they're going to pull worms out of the black cherry trees and the oak trees near your garden as well. But they will frequent the garden. And yeah, you will see some insect damage caused by these little worms, but usually not enough to be economically important. And if sometimes in some cases it is economically important, then I use the old finger method. Broccoli, particularly.
So I'm a member of the Michigan Bluebird Society, and I'm a bluebird landlord.
Oh yeah.
And so every year about the third Saturday or so in March, the Michigan Bluebird Society offers a free conference, day-long conference they don't just talk about bluebirds, they talk about bird migration in general, fascinating topics. And they alternate between an Ann Arbor location and the Print Center at Calvin.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, it was just at Calvin in this past March. So it'll be in Ann Arbor next year. But it's just very enlightening for anyone who are folks who are bird lovers, and you just learn so much, and they have varied speakers on different subjects. So it's a wonderful day, and lunch is like $15.
There you go. So bluebirds, house wrens, chipping sparrows are a couple of my favorite ones. They're the kinds of birds that will come into my garden, and I see them in there pretty regularly. Other birds, less so. I mean, you can be more aggressive in using birds as pesticides. Chickens will happily root through a garden. Now you got to be a little careful. You need to manage them. There are times of the year you do not want chickens in your garden. If there is fruit, they will absolutely peck the fruit too. So you have to control their movement, run it like a little paddock system or something. But it's possible with chickens or ducks. And if you watch the Biggest Little Farm, they had a snail problem in their citrus trees. And it turns out ducks were, well, what did ducks eat? A lot of ducks. Snails. So they use ducks as their insecticidal control method for snails. That way they could maintain their cover crops, which were promoting the snails, but also at the same time protecting their citrus trees. So part of the idea here is biodiversity is often a tough sell. Everybody kind of wants biodiversity, but we don't necessarily think about what biodiversity does for us. And this is a really nice little example of specifically why biodiversity is important. And I would also say an agroecological system without good functional biodiversity, like little insecticidal birds, is going to be tough. If you don't have birds in there eating certain insects, then you're probably going to have to move towards pesticides. It can be almost that abrupt. So species extinction, remember I talked, it's like 2 to 3 orders of magnitude of faster pace than it used to be. And it's easy to get your arms around an endangered species like the monarch butterfly and say we should protect it. It's maybe a little less difficult to get your arms around non-obvious little birds that unless you're a birder, you really even know what they are. Why should you protect a Kirtland's warbler, for example? Well, Kirtlands aren't going to be in your garden, but Kirtlands are one example of an insectivorous little bird that eats spruce budworms like crazy. And when you start thinking about the functions that this biodiversity plays, it will be very tough to do agroecological gardening without pesticides if you do not have healthy biodiversity. And the Biggest Little Farm makes that point in spades. Okay, so we don't get bluebirds in our garden as much in the spring we do. This time of year, it's pretty much all house wrens and chipping sparrows. So we think about, natural biodiversity is going to be critical for an agroecological system. Dragonflies are eating gnats, they're eating mosquitoes, damselflies, some of the same. I've got frogs in my garden all over the place. Snakes, I like snakes in my garden because they're eating insects, and depends on maybe the kind of snake, but usually it's garter snakes. So this is, when we talk about biodiversity, this is, I think, why biodiversity is important. So what is the one efficiency that industrialized monoculture does perform well in? It's labor. And so this is going to be a tougher sell. What will it take to motivate the adoption of an extensified food production system by the general public, who are not informed in the ways that you were informed even before this class? How are you going to get people to like carrots over and above Twinkies? How are you going to get people to be willing, at least for a time, willing to pay a little bit more for their food? I mean, how many times have you gone to farmers markets and you pay a little more at a farmer's market than you might at Meijer? You might be willing to do that, but the general public is still voting with their feet. I will say at the same time, farmers markets are growing, CSAs are growing. So I think there is a move afoot, but I'd like to put a little gas on that, speed that up. So I think, I jumped the gun a little bit. There are two levers that I think are helpful. And the first one is maybe more applicable to people with maybe a faith-based background, and that is, let's make ethical choices. And then the second one is, at the same time, we tend to vote our pocketbook as a population. Can we make a financial, argument as to why we should move more towards, or move faster towards, externalized systems? So with ethical choices, I've taught a number of times through the years medical ethics at Calvin. So I'm going to just lean on medical ethics as a framework from which to think about food and human health, because it is a medical issue, right? So there are 5 particular ethics that I think are helpful here. And mostly I'm going to ask questions kind of about each one after I explain what each ethic is. So the ethics are here. Autonomy is the right to choose. It's why we do HIPAA. It's why you maybe do powers of attorney. You're giving people the right to choose their own, choose what healthcare interventions you want to be done or not be done. There's the idea of veracity, and that's to tell the truth. You would want your physician to tell you everything that's going on and not just tell you what you want to hear. And so that's a medical ethic. A physician needs to tell you exactly what's going on. There's beneficence, the idea of physicians should be doing good, or at least more good than harm, which its partner is non-maleficence, which is do less harm. So beneficence would be, if you need surgery, a doctor could say, I'm not going to do surgery on you because to make the incision is doing harm. The idea is, yes, you're going to make the incision because by taking out the appendix, for example, you're doing more good than harm. But that's often a trade-off when you start talking about, the kinds of drugs that we use, chemotherapies. Chemotherapies are toxic. They're intended to be toxic to kill the cancer cells, but they're not perfect. They kill some healthy cells too. So there are lots of side effects with chemotherapies. In some of the last line of defense chemotherapies are ones that are going to make you really, really sick, bring you to the brink of death with the hope of killing those cancer cells so that you can recover and become healthy, hopefully cancer-free. But then there's often that's that line, right? Of are they going to do, is this particular chemotherapy in this case going to do more harm, kill your patient, or good, potentially knock out the cancer? And then there's the idea of distributed justice. So you were talking about justice earlier, and that is fair access. And the idea of medical ethics is it's fair access to necessary health care. But we're going to use this as a framework and think about food. So are people autonomous as it relates to food? So you all have money. You can go to the grocery store and choose food to eat, and you can buy it. But when you go to buy food, do you know what food is good for you, healthy, or not? Does the public understand the impacts of food consumed on their own health and human health? Or how many people think that Twinkies are actually good for you? Or that I need to drink milk as a source of protein? Or I need to drink milk as a source of calcium? So the idea of autonomy is free and informed, competent persons have the right to choose. So that's a little bit more thorough way of saying what autonomy is. The assumption is if you are informed and you are free to choose, then you are autonomous. But if you are misinformed because of maybe deceiving labels, you're not autonomous. You have had your autonomy stripped away from you by maybe a company that's trying to sell you something that they're getting you to buy something that they're trying to sell. So that could be into untruthfulness, that's veracity. Or can consumers distinguish between legal and marketing labels? So healthy on any label is not a regulated word. You can put healthy on anything, and you cannot be sued. So healthy choice meals. How many people think they are healthy, and how healthy actually are they? Okay, because if you thought they were healthy because the advertising campaigns were convincing, you're not autonomous. Because there's pretty good evidence to say there's a lot more calories and a lot more salt in there than there probably should be, even though there's maybe an occasional pea. Do consumers know where, how, and by whom their food is produced? Because if you don't know those things, you are not autonomous. You don't know what's in that box necessarily. I mean, there's a federally regulated label that gives you some basic information. But if you buy this food and you care about the environment, you don't necessarily even know how that food was produced, what the impact of producing it was on the environment. How many of you knew that you could reduce greenhouse gas footprint in your diet by 13 to 14-fold by eating chicken and not beef? 13x. That's 13 times less greenhouse gas. Are we told the truth about food and health? So veracity is always tell the whole truth. No sins of commission in what you say or omission. Are diets that reduce cholesterol, high blood pressure, chronic heart disease, and type 2 diabetes promoted as strongly as pharmaceutical drugs? Given that pharmaceutical drugs control the symptoms of the disease, but they do not do anything with the disease itself. So you're going to be a lifelong consumer of that pharmaceutical drug. And that's kind of what the pharmaceutical company wants, right? They want you to continue to be a customer. Do we recognize low-fat diets actually cause weight gain? So that was a fad back in the 80s and the 90s, even more recently than that. But you could see the obesity map, how that changed rapidly when people went aggressively after the low-fat diet, or then you can't do a no-fat diet, but you can do a low-fat diet. I mean, you can't do a no-fat diet and stay alive. You can do a really ultra low-fat diet, but if you substitute with carbs in your diet, your body is going to convert those carbs into fats. And so what happened was people ate more carbs, they didn't eat their fats, and they gained weight, which is not what was the goal was. Do we understand that some consumption of unsaturated fats is critical to good health? So not too much, then it becomes a calorie thing, but saturated fats, while they're not all that healthful for you, unsaturated fats are critically important. See the standard American diet as calorically rich but nutrient poor. So you should never, ever, if you're eating a DASH dietary pattern, have to take a vitamin supplement. So is this stuff that the general public knows kind of intuitively? Because if they don't, there's somewhere along here a violation of the ethic of veracity. Or are we protecting future food production capacity? Is the food beneficent? Does it provide aid or promote good? So who's out there promoting that you eat healthy food? Okay. There are a few things that we can align with there. Transfer subsidies from the production of unhealthy food to healthy food, making healthy food less expensive. That's the Farm Bill thing. How many people are aware that these subsidies are driving the costs in grocery stores for ultra-processed foods? That's why they're relatively inexpensive. So yeah, I don't want to necessarily take away ultra-processed food from people who really want to eat it. I mean, that's kind of their choice. If they have veracity, if they know, but just by taking off the subsidy, you could actually save yourself some federal withholding tax. What's going to happen? Well, the cost of processed foods is going to go up. The cost of meat's going to go up. But the cost of, if you just take the subsidies off, you'd put more money in your back pocket. If you actually transfer the subsidies, then the cost of fruits and vegetables would go down, which is probably naturally where they should be, given what it takes to produce a carrot as opposed to a Twinkie. If we produce food in ways that promote healthy soil, functional biodiversity, and cycle nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, water, kind of within a more closed system. Or work in a garden to produce healthy food while providing mental relaxation and physical exercise. So that's a garden for all those reasons. And I don't know, taste. I should throw taste in there too. If you've eaten freshly picked tomatoes compared to anything else, yeah, you just don't go back. Non-maleficence, first do no harm and let food be thy medicine. That's Hippocrates, the Hippocratic Oath. Hang on. Yep, I can go back.
If we go back one slide there, transfer subsidies from the production of unhealthy food to healthy food. If we were to actually tackle that, how quickly could the agricultural industry respond? I mean,
that's where I think you would want to maybe do you would want to signal it to corn and soybean growers, signal it, and then maybe more gradually make the change. I think you'd have to make that sort of change probably over a five-year period minimum. What you're going to see, I think, is farmers inherently, some farmers have more flexibility than others. If farmers see profit opportunities, they will gravitate towards them and they will figure them out. So what you'll have are some farmers switching off at least part of what they grow to try some other things if they think they can make more money. So you have to give them some space to do that. But you wouldn't want to just take away the subsidy overnight because you would put farmers out of business in a hurry. And I don't think that's anybody's goal. That being said, the Farm Bill, I think, is voted on every 6 or 7 years. It's a 5-year deal. Yeah. I think a new Farm Bill was just voted on, or is it still pending? I think they passed it. So where I get a little bit frustrated is there's like 2 or 3 senators really in charge of the Farm Bill, and there's like an Indiana senator and an Iowa Senator Grassley has been on the Farm Bill program for a long, long time. So they're vested interest because the only people who are involved from a political perspective on the Farm Bill are all in Corn Belt states. Non-maleficence, the idea of first do no harm, let food be thy medicine. Can we manage the symptoms of chronic disease, but actively promote and reward problem solutions? Or can we produce food using methods that build production capacity instead of undermining them? So promote maybe more no-tillage farming and less, and maybe just not promote tillage as much. Can we consume white meat in proper proportion and promote the consumption of fish? Distributive justice. Every fair person has reasonable access, fair and reasonable access. So this is reasonable access to healthy food versus processed food or fast food. So it turns out when you go to Grand Rapids, there are 2 for sure food deserts where it's more than a couple miles to the nearest grocery store that has fresh fruits and vegetables. And yet there are bodegas and fast food stores in their immediate vicinity. And so when people maybe don't have ready access to cars or transportation, how do you access food? So that's a little bit of the idea of where reasonable access to healthy food comes from. It can be just as simple of a problem as transportation. Then healthier foods being affordable.
Do you know how widespread the food club idea is to promote the use of healthy things?
My understanding is the food club idea is kind of a newer thing, and there's some exposure, but my guess is most people on the streets don't know. So bring it back.
Food club is the community access. Community Action House has a model where you pay a certain amount each month, depending on your income, and you get so many points to get the food. And they have like a grocery store for people who need to access cheaper food, and you get more healthy food than processed food for less.
Yeah, so there's fewer points
Points on vegetables.
fruits and vegetables. Right.
Yeah.
So this is a little different. You actually are paying into something like this, and then you get points, and then you spend your points.
Right.
So CSAs, yeah, you get a bag of whatever it is that's in season, which actually is kind of fun, because then you figure out how to cook whatever you get. You get rutabagas, and guess what? What do you do with a rutabaga?
Yeah.
I do soup, but
And
stews, but yeah, there you go. I got some habaneros for you soon.
And of course, this food club thing is accessible to more people, I think, than a CSA. And so that,
Yeah, so
and they actually choose to get the healthier food. That's what they found over the last 2 or 3 years that it's been in existence.
partly because you get more.
Pardon?
Yeah, there's one in
In Holland. Yeah, it's on.
I think there is one in Grand Rapids, but this is not functioning the same as most food pantries function. So Bice Community Food Pantry For example, you can come in and with a grocery cart and there you're not paying any money, but you can choose 2 from this category, 2 from that category, 1 from this other category. That's more on whatever they can get, whatever is available. Other than that, food pantries are, you fill a box and someone gives you a box and it may or may not be stuff that you want. And if you look at Feeding America, which does a pretty good job in a lot of respects, it's kind of what food that they can access too. So there's a lot of food in those boxes that may not necessarily be helpful. Because to have fresh food is difficult.
Thank you. And a couple comments. I think first and foremost, you have to realize that this system is built on either ignorance or stupidity, depending on how you look at it. And so the root cause of all of this is lack of information, not only specifically within the system, but within the families. There's many cultures within our local area. People don't know how to cook. They don't know how to prepare vegetables. They don't know how to pick what are good vegetables at any given time and that. And so again, the root answer for much of this is how do we teach people how to pick food? How do we teach people how to cook food? Is that being transferred to the next generation in a way that will become self-propagating? The other comment is that I work at the food pantry and I stock shelves over at that. And, both of them are dependent upon the beneficence of the corporations in this area. All of this is food that is donated, transported, and set up, with Myers, with, these other things and that. And again, there's been some people that have spent tremendous amount of effort and time and organization to make this work real well. So they're really great systems. But I think a lot of people really didn't know what's available and how to use it. So again, it's another thing where we need to get the message out. Holland, Allegan County, there's just tremendous amount of programs going on that are very well run, very beneficent. People just need to know about them.
And I was going to add at the food club, that's one thing they're trying to do with the kitchen there. They are trying to train people in the use of healthy foods. So they're doing that as well.
Yeah. Having healthy food there is one thing. Knowing what to make or how to use it is going to affect whether people are going to select it or not.
Yeah. I worked for years trying to get grocery manufacturers on behalf of my food grower clients to handle food waste better. And one thing that Meyer and a bunch of other stores are doing now is called flash food, where they put stuff on half price, older potatoes or whatever it is. But, sometimes a lemon will rot or whatever, but it's still so cheap that it makes, and it's similar to a CSA where you just take a bag and hopefully the bag isn't all jalapenos, that kind of thing. But it's been working for me. I mean, just mix up my
Hope may
diet.
do this too, but at Calvin, when they produce food in the dining halls, students will bring the excess food of any particular day to places downtown for people that need it. So to try to reduce the waste.
One of the things I wanted to center on, and we haven't touched a lot on, is the ethical treatment of animals.
Yeah.
And it probably falls under, that area of beneficence that you're
It does.
talking about.
Yeah.
But like Temple Grandin says, nature is cruel, but we don't have to be. And, just from a purely personal point of view, we're eating all of that fear and distress that the animal goes through. We've turned animals, which are sentient beings, into just another cog in the manufacturing wheel.
We treat them as a machine.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's having an effect on, our mental health in an indirect way.
I'm watching the time. We got 10 minutes, so I need to jump to this. Will an appeal to ethically appropriate systems work with the general public? I mean, I can appeal to you and bring you on board, or you would bring me on board. But generally, if we look at the general public, do ethical concerns about food and health matter? And my fear is not a lot. So most people do vote with their pocketbooks. And there's one last idea that I want to kind of give you to think about, and that is, should we place a sin tax on unprocessed foods or processed foods? And the idea of sin taxes have got a very variable, whether or not they work, has a very variable background. Cigarettes, yes. Tobacco, it has worked. Alcohol, variable. There was this thing called the prohibition. But sugar beverages, they've been tried a lot of places and they haven't stuck. The two places that I'm aware that they've stuck are New York City and LA. And lots of sin taxes, a tax surcharge on sugary beverages and other places may have been tried, but they don't stick. So I don't think putting like a sin tax on meat, I think there'd be a broad uprising, partly because people don't know. So sin taxes probably are just going to make people ticked at you. And I don't think they would necessarily be very effective. Although sometimes I might like to try. What I'd rather suggest is that what we think about here is economic democracy. This is going to be a little bit consistent with the theme that we had earlier. And so I would say practice food economic democracy. So there's a couple of words together that probably you maybe didn't necessarily put together before. The idea of economic democracy is kind of like a political vote. If you go to the booth and you cast your ballot, it's a ballot in support of typically a person and the positions of that person. So that's what we think about in terms of democracy. But if we say now economic democracy, this is like then each individual person, that's hopefully autonomous, with a back pocket that's purchasing food to eat. So the idea of economic democracy is that each dollar is a vote. And so each dollar spent on, let's say, a food item is your endorsement of that food item and how it was produced with all of the environmental, animal welfare side effects, right? So the idea is if we spend more dollars on food produced in a human health, improving food and how that food was produced, CSAs, as opposed to an industrialized ag system where you don't know your producer or what has been done to make that food that you're eating. The idea is the candidate with more dollars wins and grows their business. So broader economics would say, if we support more CSAs or we buy more of our produce from CSAs, guess what? More people are going to see starting up a CSA as a good option for a business in which to make a livelihood. And so the foods that people buy represent an endorsement of those food items and how they are produced. If we buy meat and processed foods, those markets are going to grow. You're going to get more industrialized ag producing corn and soybean in volume cheap. If people buy whole foods, especially fruits and vegetables, guess what? Farmers are going to figure out how to grow them because there's a profit opportunity. So what might more people be willing to pay more money for fruits and vegetables than the standard American diet? So this is a little bit where ethics, veracity comes into play. It assumes people are informed. The idea here is that food actually costs a whole lot more than most people are aware. And so the question is, why do people eat what they eat? We need to think a little bit about the idea of externalized costs. And the idea of externalized costs is the side effect costs of any economic activity not accounted for at the point of purchase. So features of externalized costs is they are actual costs. You are spending actual money on them. The cost can be beneficial or harmful, could be positive or negative. They are costs that are often indirect. You don't necessarily see where the cost is coming from, and they often show up with a lag time. So consequently, we tend to focus on direct costs and not side effect costs because they're hard to figure out. So they're usually forgotten and neglected. So I want to come back to this idea is food is not as cheap as you think it is. You pay, according to Jules Preddy, who wrote this little book, Reality Checks, which is kind of one of the early regenerative ag kinds of books, I guess. He says you pay for your food 3 times. You pay for it at the grocery store checkout. And those are the direct costs. So you buy a pound of hamburger, you pay, I don't know, what is it, $6? Someone said last week. $6, $7, whatever, for a pound. Those are direct costs. That's the cost to grow the beef, process the animal, ship the processed beef, and it's the cost of Meyer putting it on a shelf and having you pick it up. That's 6.4% of US income is spent on buying food in that way, the direct costs. But there are 2 other costs, and these are both externalized costs or indirect costs. We don't think about them. The first one is your taxes. And so the idea of your federal withholding tax, roughly $700 billion a year, is your federal withholding paying the government to incentivize farmers. So the government's taxing your federal withholding and then redistributing that money to corn and soybean farmers. So you don't normally think of federal withholding tax as being a food tax. That's what makes it externalized. The other one is environmental and human health side effects. So it could be tap water, the pesticides that are in your tap water. It could be that if you turn on your tap here, you realize the water comes from the water plant, which I don't know, does Holland get its water from a well or out from Lake Michigan? Yeah, so Grand Rapids does too. Guess what? There's sediments in Lake Michigan and there are toxins, there are pesticides in that water. Your water treatment plant is you're paying them for water to take that stuff out. If we didn't have farming the way we did, you wouldn't have most of those particulates in the water. You wouldn't have the pesticides. So I don't know how many of you think of paying for your water bill as being a food tax, but it's a food production side effects tax. That's why it comes with a lag time. So those 2 things are both the externalized costs. Food looks cheap because we count the externalized costs elsewhere in society and we don't think about them again. So I'm just going to jump to Tegmeyer and Duffy. They did this in 2004. They basically added up all of the externalized costs of food in the United States in 2004 dollars. And they talked about water. We got to kill pathogens that are in the water. We got to remove nitrate, which is corn fertilizer. We got to remove pesticide residues. We have to flock sediment in water to make it drinkable. When you dredge, you're typically dredging soils that would have eroded off farm fields. So you're not paying for that soil, but you're paying for the dredging to remove that soil so that ships or boats can move through a channel. Kind of all of these things, human pathogens and human pesticides. Basically, what they came down to is in 2004 dollars, $50 per person. Is that going to be enough to change your mind about what you choose to eat or not eat?
Not a question, just a comment.
Yes.
There are people who track the lifestyles of health and sustainability. LOHAS is what it's called.
Okay.
And when I first looked at this 10 years ago, it was 15% of America. And I just Googled it and it's 25% now. So it's going up 10% a year. And the market is in the 400 billion range. So what we're seeing is a slow progression of people adopting what you're talking about, agroecology.
Yeah.
And the market is growing at 10% a year.
Yeah.
So there's hope.
There is hope.
No, it's not a complete miserable situation in America with a bunch of idiots, ignoramuses.
No, exactly. Yeah, that's why I kind of say it is growing, but I'd like to put gas on it, like grow it even faster. So what does a pound of hamburger cost? If you think about the direct costs, externalized costs, there's one really big externalized cost that was not on Techmeyer's list. Do you know what it is? It's not packaging. That would actually be a direct cost. No, they kind of got that there a little bit. It's up here in air, CO2 equivalents. You know what companies actually are paying for CO2 carbon offsets? Subject of week 1. Healthcare cost. You remember that number? So we spend in the United States $4.9 trillion on healthcare. 4.2 trillion is chronic disease. Now I understand this chronic disease develops within our bodies over a period of 10, 20, 30 years. So this is not money that we can claw back immediately. But $4.2 trillion, given the population of the United States, that's about $12,800 per person per year. Is that enough money to change? If that is the externalized plus 50, $12,855, if that is the externalized cost of food, that's what actually your food is costing you. It is assuming that all chronic disease is food related, and that's not true. It's 80%. Okay, so we can take 20% off. Still a big number. So the idea is help people understand that. Help people understand chronic disease is derived from food that we eat and what kinds of food that we eat. If then people are motivated to eat a DASH dietary pattern, more diverse foods would be produced. Those price points should come down, especially if we were to redirect subsidies a bit. Greater food diversity and less meat is consistent with agroecological methods. It's the idea of polycultures, growing annual plants, trees, fruit trees, berry plants or berry shrubs with animals. So how can we incentivize the development of healthy and sustainable food system? I think it makes sense to appeal to ethical, moral lifestyles, for sure. Give people their autonomy, help them understand what a DASH dietary pattern would do to their health, how that will help them save money, reduce their healthcare bills, inform how their lifestyles maybe will improve quality of life for sure, maybe longevity. Speed economic democracy by redirecting subsidies from feed and fuel to nutrient-rich foods. And then finally, connect people with agroecological local growers to provide trust, tastier food, and even address global climate change at the same time, because then your greenhouse gas footprint will come way down. Yes, ma'am.
How would this change in our methods affect the producers of the products that we're altering?
It could affect the producers a lot. And that's why I think I would hope for that this would be an evolution, not a revolution. So if you change overnight, if you redirect those subsidies very quickly, you could really harm people and put farmers out of business. And I would want to give them all, a fighting chance, a fighting opportunity to see an opportunity for maybe a profit. Yeah. And so the question is, how fast can this progress? To your point, it's actually progressing. And it's progressing probably at a faster rate now than it was 10 or 15 years ago. So I think there is an evolution that is happening as people become more aware of diet and side effects of drugs. And, what can I do to not have to take insulin? Realize there are things that actually we can do. So that's where veracity and autonomy become really important as ethics. People need to know that there are off-ramps. It's not exactly what they may have thought.
So assuming we all become a little more sustainable in our diets and we run into the train wreck that is climate, with the ocean dying from the carbon we put in it. That's an irreversible impact of the environment.
Yep.
The collapse of the great waterfall near England, all these things are going to happen to us in the next 50 years or so, depending on how you do the math.
Yep.
What will that do to the agroecology vision? Is it going to promote it? Because you say, look what we did to our planet. Let's all go ecological.
I think it could promote it. I haven't thought about that actually very much, but as I'm thinking about it now, polycultural systems would be healthier ecosystems than monocultures. I think the collapse of some of these broader kind of global, I don't know what you call it, geophysical features that we kind of take for granted, the Gulf Stream, for example. I think you'd want to have healthy ecosystems as opposed to not healthy ecosystems. So agricultural fields, industrialized monoculture fields are not healthy. They're not healthy ecosystems. We're using implements and pesticides to manage them. They, as not healthy ecosystems, would have less resilience, less resistance to changes. In other words, there are going to be more problems in those situations and less resiliency, the ability to be able to bounce back. If we start talking about polycultural systems, I think you're talking about agroecosystems that are healthier. There's a better chance that those kinds of systems will be more resistant to those changes and more resilient. What it will mean probably is that the things that you plant in a polyculture will probably change over time, and they could change quite fast. I'll give you a quick example of how industrialized systems are doing this in corn. So when I was an agronomist, I was in Southern Indiana, lived near Evansville, and I was the agronomist for Kentucky and Southern Illinois, Southern Indiana. Typically, they were planting 115-day hybrids that take 115 days to mature. And in Michigan, the farmers by my dad's place in Alto were planting 102 to 105-day hybrids. Guess what they plant in Alto today? 115-day hybrids. Because we have literally moved 3 growth zones north. If you're gardening, you know this. So the beauty of a polycultural system is not only do you have to look for crops of the right maturity, so if you go far enough north, you could not have suitable corn hybrids that actually fit your new zone. But you can change crops if you're in a polycultural system, or change your crop makeup. So I don't know, maybe we'll be growing bananas in Michigan, but then we'll be able to grow bananas in Michigan, and you might not be growing leafy greens as much. And corn, yeah, well, yeah.
So we will need with agroecology more labor.
You would definitely need more labor.
Well, I'm going to throw this out. I'm being kind of not serious, but with people losing jobs because of AI.
Yeah.
No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
It could actually help going forward. People don't have jobs. And if we actually do an agroecology, maybe, I mean, it's a different way to think.
Yeah, I would hope that I hope people are moving into agroecological jobs because they want to be there, maybe not as a last resort. But it could mean that there is some labor available, but there's labor available now. Calvin has worked with some of the inner city folks, kind of the Baxter Street neighborhood, for example. There are abandoned house lots and actually our nursing department is taking the lead on helping people understand, rather than just having weeds grow in that lot, can they actually grow a garden? But that entails teaching them, how to grow tomatoes, because they know what a tomato is, but they have no idea how to produce them. So it turns out these turn out to be hugely popular. And so it turns out other people are gardening in the Baxter neighborhood that wouldn't normally garden because they see what they can actually do. They don't actually understand prior what they could actually do.
Yeah, I think as you've mentioned, the 800-pound gorilla in the whole system is federal subsidies in that.
Yeah.
And if we all got together and marched down to our state representatives and say, man, change, what should we demand at this point? You know, again, we can vote for with our dollar, which we do. We can take the time to go to the farmer's market or be involved in some of these other things. But to me, the real question is, what is a realistic, constructive way to restructure the federal subsidy to agriculture? And I think we need a convincing argument for what we're asking these people to do. You know, what are we asking these farmers where you drive across Michigan and there's acres and acres of soybeans and corn? All right, plant tomatoes, plant watermelon. You know, again, honestly, what are we asking them to do? I think is an honest question at this point to really turn around this whole Titanic of a agricultural system.
Yeah, I think the Farm Bill that would motivate faster change. And I think what I'm trying to do here is connect food and environmental health with human health. And so if we want to have a healthier, who wouldn't want to have a healthier public with the potential of actually reducing healthcare bills? And that this could actually be a good thing for our national economy. Connect that with the Farm Bill. So it would be to, I don't want to say demand, but say we need access to healthier food. And maybe a rethinking of the Farm Bill could help us move faster in the right direction. You know, I don't think this is where it would be an evolution, right? Not a revolution. So some farmers that are growing corn can and will need to continue to grow corn, but it might be marginally less. So there are lots of corn farmers out there that are actually pretty old. The average age of a farmer is like in the 60s. So as those farmers go out and other people come in and buy the land, that's probably your better opportunity. But Golden Grains, which farms like 15,000 to 20,000 acres of corn in Ottawa and Kent County, corn and soybeans, they can't change. They might make a little less money, or they may have, but I think they would be fine.
Maybe the elephant in the room is land ownership.
Okay, I think we better wrap this up. We're 15 minutes. Unless there's more questions, I don't want to quash any questions here or comments.
I've enjoyed being with you a lot. So
Well, we've enjoyed having you, David. Amen. I can't clap with the microphone. Yeah, this is the fourth of four sessions, and each of them have been really interesting and
good.